While searching through the many great hiking spots of the Finger Lakes region, you may come across a large green space on the map, stretching over the hills and hollows of western New York, under the name Connecticut Hill Wildlife Management Area. If this place is familiar to you, then most likely, so are the stories. The stories of strange voices emanating from a long-abandoned graveyard, the resting place of a purported witch. The reports that a legendary forest-dwelling ape Bigfoot lives within its borders. The tales of strange green lights in the sky above the trees, signaling the presence of possible visitors from another world. Any one of these accounts is strange, but for all of them to emanate from one area, that's entirely unique. But Connecticut Hill is a unique place. The land has rejected all those who have attempted to farm it, but it found new life as a wildlife management area. And today it attracts visitors for hunting, fishing, and hiking. And over the years, it's also gained a reputation as a hotspot for the supernatural and the paranormal. Hello and welcome to These Haunted Trails. We are Jimmy
and Jarritt, two brothers who explore the trails of the natural world and the supernatural tales and legends that surround them.
This episode, we're exploring Connecticut Hill Wildlife Management Area with its many trails and many tales of the strange and unexplained. The Connecticut Hill Wildlife Management Area encompasses 11,237 acres, making it the largest wildlife management area in the state of New York. Just south of Ithaca, New York, in the Finger Lakes region, the area is split between the towns of Alpine and Newfield. Prior to the Revolution, the land was inhabited by Native American tribes, mostly the Cayuga people. In 1779, under the orders of George Washington, the native population of western New York was displaced by the army of John Sullivan.
Growing up around here, we heard that name a lot.
Considering his actions, how could we not? However, Sullivan's army only moved through the area of Newfield without an engagement, but I'm certain he'll come up again in future episodes. In 1795, the land was acquired by Robert C. Johnson. In 1800, due to tax reasons, he had to transfer control of the land to the state of Connecticut, hence its current name. It was then leased out plot by plot to white settlers who moved in to farm. However, that didn't go as well as many had hoped for.
Due to a supernatural reason?
Not in this case. The land was simply too ill-suited to farming. The increased elevation and poor soil made the land difficult to farm at the best of times. Now, just down the hill in Newfield, farming was comparatively easy. Sayings even developed from the locals. You can't raise cane with a jug of whiskey on Connecticut Hill. Keep your windows rolled up on Connecticut Hill, someone might try to throw a deed inside. When the Great Depression hit in the 1930s, the situation only got worse. The state government was able to purchase the land and relocate the farmers that remained. Of the dozens of plots settled by farmers on Connecticut Hill, only one had made it to this point without foreclosure. Eventually, New York State turned the land into a wildlife management area, the status it enjoys to this day.
So, when did all the supernatural sightings start?
Let's start with the oldest story, the Witch's Grave. Within the area, you'll find Connecticut Hill Cemetery, sometimes referred to as the Witch's Cemetery. It's located at the intersection of Connecticut Hill Road and Boylan Road.
Wait, it's located at a crossroads?
That's right, and it certainly adds to the paranormal feel of the place. But it wasn't a crossroads graveyard in the historical sense. It was a community graveyard located next to the schoolhouse. Now, you have to look hard to find this graveyard. It's incredibly old. It contains graves dating as far back as 1828. Its residents include members of the Connecticut Hill community, and even a few veterans of the War of 1812. Its size has been reduced over time, and the stones have overgrown or fallen into disrepair. Should you find it and make your way inside, you may find a cracked gravestone on the ground, bearing the name Elizabeth Whitney.
Who was Elizabeth Whitney?
She is the purported Witch of Connecticut Hill, and the focal point of reports of supernatural activity in the area. Her gravestone is often made more visible by the tokens that people will leave.
What do you mean, tokens?
Well, people will leave tokens to appease the spirits of the graveyard. This usually takes the form of coins, charms, little pumpkins, The day I checked it out, someone left an especially creepy-looking doll.
A doll? Ugh. So what is it that people are appeasing with these tokens?
Well, people believe that the Witch of Connecticut Hill haunts the area. There are stories of ghostly figures and strange voices around the graveyard at night. Some have also claimed to have heard the sounds of a woman sobbing around Elizabeth's gravestone. The graveyard has become a favorite spot for local ghost hunters, whose claims include ghost orbs and readings on spirit boxes.
So what caused Elizabeth Whitney to gain the reputation as a witch?
Well, that isn't clear. From her gravestone and from some local history, we know that she lived on Connecticut Hill and was married to Ezra Whitney. She outlived her husband and died in 1900 at the ripe age of 94. Apart from that, we really don't have much to go on. In fact, there's at least one other contender for the title of the Witch of Connecticut Hill, according to some locals at least. But that hasn't stopped the local legend and the continuing flow of visitors who come to see the grave. Sadly, it was vandalism that led to the current state of Elizabeth's gravestone. It was knocked over and broken into several pieces. Remember, leave no trace extends to graveyards as well as forests. So whether Elizabeth truly is the Witch of Connecticut Hill, her name and her broken gravestone remain in the minds of all who venture that way.
Now we get to the fun stuff. The next topic, the UFO sightings of Connecticut Hill.
That's right. Now, the hamlet of Newfield, New York, borders the eastern side of Connecticut Hill. It was here in 1967 that residents began reporting some strange sightings. One summer night, high school student Barbara Warris spotted a large red pulsating object flying over Connecticut Hill. On October 27th, the Williamsons saw a diamond-shaped object that was, quote, as big as the high school gymnasium, floating above the houses of Cayuga Street before it flew away. Local mechanic Charles Prentice observed a UFO near his house. Directly afterward, he reported he found the batteries of his cars mysteriously drained. Danny Jones and his girlfriend claimed a UFO followed them and beamed light right into their car as they drove along Benjamin Hill Road. One night on his farm, August Nutilla saw a collection of strange lights hovering motionless in the sky. He said the thing lit up and took off. When it went over the trees, you could see them light up.
Was that guy's last name Nutella? Like the spread?
No, it was Nutilla, with 2 U's and a KN. But all these sightings paled in comparison to the one reported by 12-year-old Donald Chizar and his friend, 10-year-old Pat Crozer. On the evening of October 24th of 1967, the boys were playing on the porch of Pat's house on Main Street. At around 9:30 p.m., the boys noticed an object in the sky moving towards them, which then stopped to hover just above the houses.
What did this object look like?
Well, according to the boys' description and sketches made by Donald, it was a saucer-shaped object. It had an antenna on top and what appeared to be a box filled with red, green, and white lights on the bottom. The boys said the craft tipped downward so they could see the top, which bore strange lettering that they could not recognize, and 2 square windows. It was in these windows they saw 2 alien beings.
Please, tell me they got a description.
That they did. I'll read you the description from the Ithaca Journal in November 1967. At each window was what Don called, quote, an alien, with a silhouette roughly like that of a human except bumpy or rough, like rocks. They said they could see the aliens down to the hips, which seemed to jut out sharply and larger than in human figures, but they could not see any facial features. The figures seemed to the youths to be frozen, in that they were never seen to move. In the background, as far as they could see, were complicated control panels with lights and knobs of all kinds. After about a minute, the boys moved to try to get someone, but then the craft leveled and disappeared.
Ugh, typical. Just to fly away, just like all the others.
Not fly away, it simply vanished. The boys were very specific about that.
Whoa, did anyone else see it?
That first time it was just Don and Pat, but Don would later recall that the dogs in the neighborhood had begun to bark as though, quote, something had hurt their ears. A detail corroborated by other Newfield residents. Later, on 2 other occasions, the boys and their family members claimed to see the craft further in the distance.
That sounds like a lot of sightings.
Well, they were enough that residents of Newfield had begun to reach out for help. Soon, experts arrived on the scene to investigate and hear people's reports. First to arrive was William Donovan and Bruce Newbrook of the Aerial Investigations and Research Corporation.
That sounds pretty official to me.
Well, it gets even more official. Also investigating the incidents was Lieutenant Gerald White of the 35th Air Division. He was the UFO officer for Hancock Air Force Base in Syracuse. Finally, there was astronomer Dr. J. Hynek of the Condon Committee.
What's the Condon Committee?
It was a group from the University of Colorado that was commissioned by the U.S. Air Force to study UFOs. Hynek was also the chief scientific consultant for Project Blue Book.
The Project Blue Book? The official study by the Air Force into UFOs?
That's right, this was no joke. These researchers held a meeting at the Waris family home, hearing from 45 local residents. Afterwards, some of the townsfolk accompanied Donovan as they searched Connecticut Hill itself for any signs of UFOs.
Were there any findings?
Well, despite the abundance of sightings in Newfield, there was no photographic evidence. As with many cases like this, nothing concrete could be garnered from the sightings. There were a few verifiably false UFOs due to some pranks. Some Cornell students released some flaming laundry bags into the sky to mess with people, and a pilot put some lights on his plane for the same reason.
So, what was the official verdict from the researchers?
Well, Lieutenant White and Dr. Hynek concluded that it was just regular aircraft that people were seeing. Donovan was less convinced. He suggested that a recently built particle accelerator at Cornell University was attracting the vessels from space. The physicists at Cornell responded with a resounding, "That's not how that works." So the investigators were satisfied and they left Newfield shortly thereafter. In 1969, Project Blue Book itself was terminated, though its reports are available to the public today if you want to check them out. After that wild summer and fall in 1967, the government had closed the book on Newfield's UFOs. The sightings declined, but they've never truly stopped. To this day, Connecticut Hill is known for strange sightings in the sky. People report seeing green lights or flashes. Some claim they pass through areas in which all of their electronics mysteriously cease working. When walking through the area, we always take a minute to enjoy the sights around us and then cast our eyes skyward, just in case.
Now we can talk about the sightings of Bigfoot.
You mean Sasquatch?
I mean the skunk ape.
The folk monster?
That's more of a regional thing.
You mean the Yeti?
No, that's definitely something different. Well, for the uninitiated, can you tell us what Bigfoot is?
Bigfoot is, of course, the ape-like cryptid which resides in the forests of North America. Most sightings have centered on the Pacific Northwest, but there are reports from all over the country of the creature. There are even some regional variations, as we mentioned before, such as the skunk ape of Florida, or Momo of Missouri. The physical descriptions of Bigfoot remain fairly consistent whenever they're sighted. They're always described as large, bipedal, ape-like creatures, powerfully built, and covered in hair which is usually black or brown. Reports vary on their size, ranging from human size to up to 9 feet tall. Some descriptions include a strangely human face. The creature can also have a powerful stench accompanying it.
Wait a second. Is the plural Bigfoot big feet?
Or Bigfoots.
I definitely know if you're in Europe, it's big meter. I think it's safe to say that Bigfoot has become the most famous of cryptids, at least in the United States.
As far as I can tell, the sightings on Connecticut Hill started sometime in the 70s, and since then the hill has gained a reputation as a Bigfoot hotspot. A section of Connecticut Hill has become known as the Alpine Portal among Bigfoot researchers and enthusiasts. Bigfoot researchers have claimed that the area is the location of a migratory pod. That is, it's a stop for Bigfoot as they migrate south for the winter.
Are you suggesting that Bigfoot migrate?
Not at all. They could be carried. Let's maybe stop before we go down the Monty Python quoting rabbit hole, shall we? I was able to find descriptions of some of the encounters on Connecticut Hill. People claim to hear strange vocalizations from unidentifiable animals, along with knocking sounds as though something is striking the trees in the area. Both are common in Bigfoot encounters and are purported to be their method of communicating. Visitors also point to mysterious scratches on trees in the area as signs of Bigfoot marking their territory. One report involved a team of firemen. As they drove their truck down Route 224, just south of the hill, a Bigfoot darted across the road, barely missing them, before disappearing into the woods.
Has anyone ever gotten any proof?
Some people claim to have gotten photos, videos, or recordings. Some have even claimed to have taken casts of the creature's iconic footprints. This hard evidence is tough to find, though. Perhaps the biggest proponent of Connecticut Hill's Bigfoot reputation was Tim Holmes of Elmira, New York. According to him, Connecticut Hill is the heart of Bigfoot country. At one point, he even started the Bigfoot World Office, based out of an office building in Elmira. He was known for searching for Bigfoot through the hill with a shotgun ready to go.
Whoa, I thought Bigfoot were chill.
Well, yeah, all things considered, they could be described as shy and retiring. They shun humans and generally flee from cameras. But Tim claims to actually have fought with one during an encounter in the Philippines, hence the shotgun. Needless to say, he's quite an interesting dude. Interesting enough to be featured in at least 2 documentaries. There's Man of the Mountain from 2006 and The Bigfoot Hunter, Still Searching from 2011.
Did they find anything in these documentaries?
Well, according to Greg Newkirk, the director of The Bigfoot Hunter, there was some convincing material. In the film, they hear Bigfoot knocking sounds, they find footprints, and even get rocks thrown at them from an unseen assailant. These films are micro-budget productions and are extremely hard to come by, so if you can find a copy, you can decide for yourself.
Is Tim Holmes still running the Bigfoot World Office?
Well, there's no office currently in Elmira. The last mention I can find of Tim is from 2011. After that, I haven't found any indications if he's still active or even lives in the area. Most likely, wherever he is, he's still searching for the mysterious creature that has eluded so many for so long.
Are there any other stories from Connecticut Hill?
There are definitely many more stories from the area that are interesting, if not supernatural in nature. There was the original owner of Connecticut Hill, who was busted for crooked dealings and had a hand in the building of Washington, D.C. There was another local resident who attempted to create a false coal rush. And my personal favorite, the time a deer was spotted in Newfield.
A deer? What's so special about a deer?
Well, to hear about these stories, I suggest you check out the Newfield Historical Society. It was their research and personal experience that made this episode possible. You can reach out online, or better yet, visit them in person. They're right on Main Street in Newfield, and everyone there is incredibly knowledgeable and more than willing to share their history of Newfield, including Connecticut Hill. Stop in on your way to or from a hike, say hi, have a Rice Krispie square, or even take a coffee break.
With all this talk of mysterious creatures, it sure is getting me hungry.
Good thing, unlike Bigfoot, Big Nerd Coffee Company is not hard to find. Enjoy any number of pastries and breakfast sandwiches, along with their famous coffee blends.
If you can't make up your mind, ask about their coffee flights, and keep your eyes out for their new monthly cryptid specialty blends.
That's Big Nerd Coffee Company in Elmira, New York. Check them out in-store or online and join the fight against corporate coffee today.
Now let's get to the hike.
Now, Jarritt, Connecticut Hill is a wildlife management area. What does that mean?
A WMA, like a state park or forest, in that it's protected land set aside for the public. Hiking is allowed and in fact encouraged, but WMAs are specifically for promoting hunting, fishing, and trapping for wildlife management.
Is there anything we should know before heading on a hike in Connecticut Hill?
Considering its primary use, I would suggest staying aware of when hunting season is on and avoiding hikes during that time, both for safety and to give hunters some time to enjoy their sport. As a WMA, there's less of a presence in that area, such as park rangers and even fellow hikers. You're much less likely to find a trail map or help if you get lost. Considering the size of Connecticut Hill, over 11,000 acres, it's best to avoid that. Plus, the trails are maintained, but not as clearly as most state parks we've been to. We definitely suggest knowing your route, let somebody know where you're going, and keeping a map and compass handy.
So, can I go anywhere I want on this land?
Well, no. There are private properties within the area, so it's best to stick to the trails and keep pets leashed. There are plenty of routes to take in the area. There's the Finger Lakes Trail, located in the northeastern quadrant. This is a 2.5-mile loop and is an easy walk around the woods. On the opposite end is the southwestern quadrant. This is the Van Loan Hill Trail. It's a 5.6-mile loop that'll take you through slightly more hilly terrain as you traverse some stream beds and hollows. But for this episode, we're looking at a through hike that connects both of these loops and takes you right past the Witch's Grave. This hike starts at the Van Loan Trailhead and ends at the Bob Cameron Trailhead, covering the distance of about 8.6 miles.
What's the trail look like?
This trail is long, and the terrain contains streams, hills, and hollows. The foliage is mostly newer growth deciduous trees. There's nothing along this trail that is particularly technical. Prepare for a walk over easy to moderate challenging terrain.
All right, let's get started.
Starting our route on the western side of the Van Loan Hill Trailhead on Gulf Road in Alpine, there's a large boulder with a plaque on it that says Barton Dam. The trailhead is right next to it, with the trail markers painted on the trees. Once on the trail, veering right will take you right through the creek bed in a small valley known as the Cayuga Gulf. This creekside trail is flat and easy to traverse. After about 1.5 miles, there's two places you'll have to cross the stream. The first has a wooden bridge, and there's a small waterfall on the left. A nice place to stop to take a breath. The second bridge was washed away, and the creek needs to be traversed by foot.
Do I have to be prepared to get my feet wet?
Don't worry, this isn't exactly the Mississippi. Directly after the bridges, the trail starts to head northeast and climb Swan Hill. You may notice some foundations of old houses and barns left on the trail. This part requires some cardio and quad strength.
I'm not worried about that. I've been doing lunges.
At about the 3.1 mile mark is the trail junction. Turning left will send you to the rest of the way on the Van Loan Loop and back to the start. Here, we're taking a right to finish the through hike. Just after the trail junction, you cross Todd Road heading east. From there, the trail heads northeast for about 1.4 miles. This section has a steady but low-grade incline heading up the hill. At this point, you cross Connecticut Hill Road, and the trail turns directly north. After a quarter mile later, the trail crosses Cabin Road.
There's a lot of road crossings on this hike. They're dirt roads, and they don't see a ton of traffic. Still a good idea to look both ways.
From here, the trail heads north along the ridge of the hill for about 1.8 miles. This is the flattest section of the hike. This hike is not the most scenic, but this section is the best for getting a good view. It's right along the ridge of the hill, and you can get a nice view of the valley to the east in some of the spots. At the end of this stretch, the trail crosses Boyland Road. At this point, a short detour will take you to the Connecticut Hill Cemetery and the Witch's Grave. Take a left turn on Boyland Road and walk a quarter of a mile to the intersection with Connecticut Hill Road. The graveyard is on the intersection's southeast corner. Should you stop in the graveyard, remember to leave the graves in a state you found them in, except for maybe leaving some tokens for Elizabeth Whitney, if you're so inclined.
What would you leave?
Probably something of low impact, like rocks or shells. From there, go back to the trail as it heads northeast. This section descends steeply downhill until it crosses Connecticut Hill Road. From there, the trail begins another gradual ascent. After half a mile, the trail turns sharply to the west and keeps heading uphill. After another half mile, the trail crosses Tower Road and then Tower Drive to take us finally to the Bob Cameron Trailhead. This is the highest point in the area, the top of Connecticut Hill, and the end point of the through hike.
Whew, finally done.
Unless, of course, we decide to make this an out and back hike, in which case we would turn around and do the whole trail in reverse.
So, Jarritt, what's your rating on this hike?
Well, this hike is one of the longer ones we've tried. It's not the most challenging and technical, but you do need some endurance, especially if you want to do the full 17.2 mile out and back excursion. Physically, I'd say it's a good hike if you want to test your baseline endurance for some long distance hiking. Connecticut Hill is a great little known area that allows for some awesome hikes. While it is certainly less scenic, the abundance of trails and natural surroundings more than makes up for it. And remember, if Bigfoot, aliens, and ghosts leave no trace, so can you.
Thank you all for listening to These Haunted Trails. This is Jimmy.
And this is Jarritt. Boy, we covered a lot of ground this time.
Well, Connecticut Hill is a special place, and there's so much to talk about. A special thanks goes out to the Newfield Historical Society. They were gracious enough to meet with me in person and answer all of my questions. It was their personal insight and extensive research that made this episode possible. I truly cannot say enough about everyone down there. I highly recommend you stop in on Main Street in Newfield. Everyone there is more than happy to share their knowledge, and they have some good Rice Krispie squares.
Other thanks go out to our friends Matt and Beth for sharing their knowledge of the trails of Connecticut Hill. And special thanks to our sponsor, Big Nerd Coffee Company. Check them out online. Join the fight against corporate coffee.
Remember, on These Haunted Trails, we adhere to leave no trace and encourage everyone listening to do the same. To keep our natural spaces clean and ensure their longevity, please remember to keep to the marked trails, carry in and carry out, and be respectful of the environment, wildlife, and your fellow hikers. And that goes for graveyards, too. After all, we want to stay on Elizabeth's good side. After all, on Connecticut Hill, you are the visitor.